Today is June 17th, 2021. Okay, my name is Michelle Robinson. Welcome to Native Calgarian. These lands, I'm just going to start over because I don't know why I'm talking like an idiot. Okay.
I can hear it thumping in the background.
Yeah, it's me like trying to get my notes all figured
Okay.
out for some particular
Okay.
reason. So I'm like, why did it scroll up? Anyway, okay, this time I'm for sure. The diva.
I won't look at you.
Yeah. Oh gosh, so funny, right? Okay, I'm good. Today is June 17th. Welcome to Native Calgarian. Oki, Naganago Mekochi Che Stokom Aki. My name is Red Thunder Woman. My English married name is Michelle Robinson, and I use she and her pronouns. Native Calgarian is being recorded on the lands of the Niitsitapi, which is the Blackfoot Confederacy. The Blackfoot south of the imposed US-Canadian border are the Blackfeet. North of the border are the Siksika, Gunai, and Bagani of the Confederacy. These lands were signed in 1877, September 22nd, with signatures that include the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Wesley, Chiniki, Bearspaw Nations of the Stoney, and the Dene from Tsuut'ina. This was Treaty 7 way back in 1877, and they had already passed the Indian Act in 1876, so we already knew it was nefarious, even though for our people, it was a spiritual covenant. I acknowledge all First Nation, Métis, Inuit, status and non-status across Turtle Island as the keepers of these lands. All non-Indigenous are treaty partners with the government signing on your behalf. I honor the Blackfoot as the elders and members have been so kind to me on my Red Road journey. Elder Red Crane taught me how to pronounce my spirit name. I was born in Calgary, or in Blackfoot McKinstis as Michelle Elliott, another English name which has afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. My mother is Northern Slavey Dene or Satu Dene, but my Indian Act imposed status card by the Canadian government says Yellowknives Dene. My father is so Canadian. I'm a daughter of the Mayflower and a daughter of the American Revolution, while having an Indian Act imposed status card. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Hare people, also called the Great Bear Lake people in Treaty 11. I'm a native to Turtle Island, and my Dene nation is a visitor to this area of Quintotine Indahe in Satu Dene, meaning many horse town, named after the Calgary Stampede. Land acknowledgements are critical for creating a safer space for Indigenous, as well as honoring the host as a guest and acknowledging your role as a treaty partner. My humblest apologies to the Blackfoot elders and language keepers as I try to learn proper pronunciation. Any mistakes or misinterpretations will be on me. I encourage questions so that misunderstandings can be cleared up as soon as possible. I do not speak on behalf of all Indigenous, but I share what I know as I walk down my red road. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you to my previous donors for already showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. To those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or questions. I also have a YouTube channel where you can go and subscribe. Go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. And today I am lucky enough to have a return guest. Yes. Woo!
Yay.
Yeah. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, Oki. My name is Katrina. I was born and raised here in Mohkinstsis. I guess a little bit about me. My dad was born and raised in Windsor, Ontario. He's of Irish and Scottish descent. My mom, was born and raised here in Siksika, and she moved to Calgary when she was a teenager. I think she was about 14. And she raised all of us here. I am Blackfoot from Siksika Nation. When I was born, I was gifted a Blackfoot name by my grandparents, Jean and Philip Backfat, which is Madakigwan. I have to be really careful when I say that because it means another girl, but it's very similar to how you say potato girl. So I was taught to say that pretty slow, Madakigwan. Later in life, I think when I was about 26 years old, I was gifted an adult name by my late aunt, Esther Simon. And so that is Nidena Mayaki, which means one gun woman. that was passed down to me just before she left us. And so she shared to me the significance of that name and where that came from. So she was named by her late uncle, Mark Wolfleg Sr., who served in the World War. And so that came to him in a vision of, a woman alone with a gun, and how victorious and fierce she was. And so I wear that with pride. And yeah, I've obviously been on the podcast before, back in, I think, January with Michelle. So I'm excited to do a part 2 and to continue the conversation, I think get a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I'm really excited for that too, because behind the scenes, we know each other, and I know some of the things that have been happening. But the thing about telling our stories is that it's not easy for us. And anyone who's listened to the podcast has heard me say that time and time again. And so I have a lot of respect for you wanting to come on and talk about it in your way. But before we do, so you just told me the story about your name, and it's such a great name. I just honor that so much. But I was given from a friend of mine shell casing from Siksika, and I put it in my medicine pouch along with my aniscum. And so that helps protect me everywhere I go. And I always think about that. I always think about the power of the Blackfoot, and then gifting something like that. So to hear you talk about that was pretty incredible. And yesterday I was lucky enough, the Friendship Center had Adrian Wolflake, and he talked about the contingent of Indigenous people that went over to the beaches of in France, and that incredible ceremony. He was teaching us all about that, and he actually showed us there's a huge memorial, and it has one of the members from your area. His name was up there from World War I. And I just was bawling all day yesterday, and my eyes are all watery today thinking about it. So I just wanted to share that with you, because it's so the Blackfoot, they come from such a strong background, and they really are warriors in so many different ways, in the different ways that you can carry yourself. And that's why it's an honor to have you back, and to hear you talk about who you are and your name, because I see you as one of those strong warrior women. And we talk about violence against Indigenous women, and it's so insidious, and it's in every aspect. And that's why you talking and sharing your story, it's just such a sign of strength. And I honor that. So I'm grateful to have you here to talk about what you would like to talk about. So yeah, I'll just pass you the floor. Oh, no, wait, I'm not going to pass you the floor, because I wanted to tell you that when you were on my show, obviously your associations and such very much promoted it. And there was this huge spike in downloads from your first show. So I wanted to say thank you for all that work that you had done, giving it to your colleagues and your friends and family, because a lot of people heard that episode, and I'm really grateful. So thank you.
Yes. Well, I'm grateful too. Thank you for, the platform. And I think that it is so important to, even in this, demonstrate the relationship of like ongoing conversations. And, I think that respect that you also gave to me to share what I needed in that moment, and knowing all of the stuff that I was holding on to, and also, giving me the space to continue that conversation. These are, the types of avenues that I think are really important for people to learn and to be able to connect to other people's stories. And so I appreciate that too. And I also really appreciate you sharing that story, because Mark Wolfleg was Adrian's dad. So yeah, that just, helps me to know that I'm in the right place and on the right path. And, that's, a part of our family that we are, reconnecting to right now. And I think that's a really important part of my journey. Mark Wolfleg was adopted by my great grandparents. So he was my grandpa Philip's brother. And, when I kind of started to, understand how we were related, at first it made me really sad, because I had no idea. I always knew of Mark, but I didn't know of his children. And so I've been really blessed at this point in my life to be reconnected back to them. And Elvine Wolfleg, Eagle Speaker, is one of those people that has been really important and significant in my life right now, to helping me to build that connection. And guiding me along, a good path. And losing my aunt Esther was, really, really difficult for me because she played a huge role in my life. She was my godmother and, a constant kind of person in my life that I knew would just loved me unconditionally. And she also played a huge role in passing down, some traditional knowledge within our family. And so, yeah, that kind of connection is really important for me, and hearing stories like that and noticing all of those ways that, it always brings me back home to my ancestors is really powerful. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah. Oh, well, we're on your land. We're on your land now. And it's funny, I did a land acknowledgement teaching last night, and that terminology, oh, we are a guest on this land. I'm like, oh, let's go over the history, what guest looks like compared to the reality.
Yeah. Yes. That is so important. And maybe I can even just start there. So part of what I really wanted to share today was to go a little bit deeper into my story. In the first podcast, I really felt like it was important to situate myself, to build that relationship with listeners, and to just, like I said, just situate myself, and now I want to kind of go a little bit deeper into my story and where I'm at today. And I guess I can start with how I met you. And so basically, I was working in a nonprofit agency when I met you. And at that point, I had reached out for support around training for land acknowledgements. And, as a therapist, as a psychologist, and I was working as a sexual violence therapist, the agency was really pushing us to do land acknowledgements and the importance of doing so, but in a way that really didn't fit for any of the staff. And so what I noticed really early on was, places where there was land acknowledgements, within the agency and both, externally, that for me, that was really important. That was, that touched my spirit. That really grounded me in a way, connected me to my ancestors, reminded me of, where I come from and where I am and why that's important, and how healing those moments were to feel seen. Initially there was some discomfort. Initially, I think, there was feelings that I had to process because I felt, like the spotlight was on me in that moment. Like everyone's looking, to the only Indigenous person in the room as they do this land acknowledgement. And I'm like, this is not for me. You're the one that needs the reminder. Like, there's a reason why in community we don't typically do land acknowledgements. We don't really, I think, need to. There's other ways that we acknowledge where we are and call in our ancestors and continue that relationship with the land in, I guess, a different format, but it really is the same notion. And so I definitely can understand why land acknowledgements are so important. And it really is like a first step that I feel like, I within the agency was struggling with, because I'm like, why is it so difficult for people to take this first baby step? Like, it's literally just the first step. And there is so much discomfort. So many people not willing to lean into that space. And so, I took a step back and I really started to kind of scope out what was happening for staff, and asking people directly, like, what comes up for you, and people were so fearful of asking me, like, is it okay that we do land acknowledgements? How do you feel when we, do them? And that opened up conversation and space to really kind of address what was going on within the agency. And, so I brought that to the CEO and I said, listen, like, you are pressuring staff to do these land acknowledgements, but you're not providing the training or like the foundation. That's very performative to just say, we need to be doing this, so let's check it off the list. And so I was connected to you and I reached out to you to come and do some training within the agency. And that was huge. And again, just the first baby step within that agency that, opened up, larger kind of doors. So Yeah, that's how we met.
Yeah, and the best part about that too is, and it doesn't matter the organization. I could name a million of them right now,
Mhm,
but if they're not creating a space where folks feel comfortable identifying as Indigenous, because everyone knows that they're looking at you. It's like, oh,
mhm,
we only hired one, so we're all
mhm,
looking. But you know who else is looking are the Métis that are still like not
mhm. Yeah,
acknowledging, you know, and there's so many organizations where Indigenous don't even feel safe enough to identify as Indigenous
yeah.
because that's what happens. As soon as you
Mhm,
do, they're like,
mhm,
everybody's looking at you, you know, and everybody
mhm,
wants cultural competency training from you on a drop of a dime right now, all the time.
mhm.
And,
Yep.
we were talking about what does a relationship look like? Where do we even start in these organizations? And I
Mhm,
tell people, land acknowledgements are not part of the 94 calls to action. How
mhm,
can we just even start talking about truth to
mhm.
have reconciliation if we don't even talk about where are you? Where's the
Mhm.
land you're on? Why are you
Yeah,
here? And
yeah,
don't say the word guest to me.
yeah.
Can
Yeah.
say it to other people, but don't say it to me.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
for
yeah,
sure.
I appreciate that's how we met, and I appreciate that you had reached out to me because I think it's critical, and the you shouldn't be burdened within an organization with giving cultural competency lessons on a regular, and
Mhm.
then because you're not considered that person, you were hired for a different purpose,
Yeah.
and there's so much pressure on the one Indigenous liaison they ever hire or somebody who openly talks about being Indigenous, right? Because everybody has
Mhm.
questions rather than going
Yeah.
to an elder and giving tobacco.
Mhm. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think, that was really what I had experienced within that agency. Um, so as a student, I started off within the agency. I did my practicum there and I held various roles like on the call out team and stuff like that. And, I think that the trajectory of my experience there was really just textbook. Last time you had referred to the Coco diagram, of women of color in nonprofit agencies or in organizations. And that really is what I had experienced. And I think that that is really important just to share that whole story. I think because there's so many pieces of that are really relevant to other agencies in their learning and in this process. And when I started off in the agency, I was a student. I was doing my master's of counseling and I was doing my practicum there. And I was really grateful for, a good placement or what I thought was a really good placement. Um, and I was really focused on just kind of, getting my hours done, focused on my client work that I really felt like, um, you're right. Like I didn't want to share like, hey, this is who I am, this is where I'm from. And also not even that I didn't want to, but that space doesn't exist,
Mhm.
so in the hustle of this work, I think a lot of my staff, like my peers, didn't even know that I was Blackfoot. And because I am white passing, there was a lot of things that were overlooked. And when I really started to kind of speak out a bit more was when I got through my internship and I was out of that kind of, phase of just really being focused on one thing. And I started to reflect on my journey. And at that point, I already was noticing themes in the work that I was doing.
Mm.
I was kind of questioning, like, if um, sexual violence disproportionately affects Indigenous community, then how come I don't have an Indigenous client? How come I haven't, um, even heard of like Indigenous clients in consultation? Or, why are these things not coming up? And starting to really look at like the model that, we were being taught within the agency and seeing some of the gaps there. And I guess just having time to reflect on what it had felt like for me to be a part of that agency thus far, and noticing those times where I didn't want to really engage with like the training material. And I kind of sat back and I was like, wait a minute, like I think it's because I didn't really see myself in any of this. It felt like it didn't apply to me or my community. And it was just kind of getting through it in some ways, and also like very foundational things that I had already learned, and that I felt like it was my responsibility then to, like take the next steps and integrate things and adapt for my clients, which, is always going to be true, but also just noticing that huge gap.
Mhm.
And so I definitely, started to speak out a bit more. And, as I started to feel safer with my peers, knowing that, I could speak up in meetings, and um, but also feeling that responsibility, like, why is nobody else seeing this? Why is nobody else noticing this? When I say these things, how come when I look around the room, everyone is, shocked, and, you could just feel the discomfort and
Tension.
yeah. And so that's kind of where, I started to really take a stance on, what my role was and how that was directly related to my ethical code as a psychologist. Like that is my role. And and it's also like looking around the room, like it's also your role. So, why am I alone in this?
Mhm.
Um so yeah, that's kind of how things started out. And it came to a point where, I remember there was a rally happening, or yeah, around, the pipelines. And at the same time, that same week, there was also a vigil for missing and murdered Indigenous women. And I, felt like leaving work, I was going to be in these spaces, and then coming back to a workspace where I couldn't speak about that. There wasn't space to talk about larger issues. Um, and the overlaps of that, like the relevancy in the work that we were doing, and how it's directly related, and how it's outlined so clearly in so many, spaces, and it's accessible, and yet, we're not really integrating it. So that disconnect was
And
huge.
I was just gonna add, but that conversation that we need to have, you and I need to have in those spaces, they would stop everything for everyone to talk about the ramifications of Stampede, right?
Mhm,
Like, as something that's real world, that talks about sexual assault, that talks about the reality of, an organization, or not even the Stampede, but any other type of
mhm.
major event that comes to
Yeah.
Calgary. Like, we have Folk Fest, we have Stampede, we have
Mhm.
all of these events that come here on a regular basis. We would stop everything to have that conversation.
Yeah.
But you're talking about a very relevant conversation of pipelines and
Mhm,
MMIW, and we
mhm,
won't stop to have that conversation, even though there's this big push to be like,
mhm.
we're Indigenous friendly. Well,
Yeah.
if we can't have this conversation about how pipelines and MMIW are directly related, then how friendly are you?
Mhm.
And then I know, and it's because everyone that's in that organization has family that's in oil and gas,
Yeah.
and they're not ready to have those conversations. And that is
100%.
its own violence against women, that they're not comfortable even talking about something when they are literally supposed to be the experts on talking about abuse.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes. And that like really is like the definition of privilege, I think, is to be able to remove yourself from that because you're not directly impacted, or you don't have to face that on a daily basis. And so for me, it wasn't something that I could escape. And so it really started to feel like this huge disconnection between my work self and, myself, who I am as a Blackfoot woman. And, my values weren't really aligning up with the agencies anymore. Um, and, of course, it crossed my mind, okay, do what do I do? Like, is there other options? Is it just this agency? And I think it has become so clear that it's not,
Mm.
that there really aren't any other options. Um, and more so than that, for me, it is my responsibility. It's my obligation to, my ancestors and to future generations to be able to put in that work and to be able to take a stand. I'm a very introverted person. I am very shy. I do not like, speaking up in large groups, but all of a sudden I felt so grounded in my values, to a point where, I really felt that this voice was coming from somewhere beyond me, that this was informed by so much more than just me. And looking at the bigger picture allows me to take those risks and to, take a stand and to step out of my comfort zone. Um, and so that's exactly what I did. And I started to, bring up these conversations. I started to push, for spaces. And the very first, space that I created was, I said, okay, well, let me do a PD then, let me at least have that space so that I can open up a conversation. And that's exactly what it was about. It was about, why are we not talking about this? Why doesn't this exist anywhere else? And, you know, if this agency is so, grounded and rooted in, feminism, like what are you practicing? Like, where is that showing up? And like, yeah, where are you guys at? Is this just white feminism? Like, because I don't see any other, representation or visibility. And, those things really started to stand out to me, being one of the only racialized people, the only racialized person on the clinical team, um, for sure. And so, I started to notice what the dynamics that were taking place, and how much responsibility and weight was put on other racialized staff on different teams, how disconnected all of the teams were. And so these things I started to bring up to my supervisor, and I held a sharing circle where I just invited the clinical staff into my lived experience. I shared, this is what I'm experiencing every day. I used my thesis and some of the research to kind of have a format for that, but mostly I just shared my experience. The only way that I know how to teach or how to do that work is really by sharing my lived experience. And so there was a really good response. Of course, everyone was like, oh, like, this is so important, we do care. It's just that we didn't know how to even start to have this conversation. And so I started to advocate a bit more for this to be a part of our workplace. And there had been anti-racism training already done, but just kind of having those conversations of like, oh, okay, so what came from that? Asking really curious questions about where the agency was at. And then COVID hit, and I think there was a lot of pressure on agencies, around the Black Lives Matter movement, and a lot of agencies really wanting to step up, or saying that they are stepping up. And so that really helped kind of fuel this movement. And what had happened was we created like a little committee, and that's actually where things started to come to light in terms of the dynamics within the agency. And pretty quickly I started to experience some microaggressions, and a lot of gaslighting that was witnessed for the first time, I think, within the agency. Before, I think that people didn't feel as safe to speak out about it, but we were having regular sharing circles where we invited staff to lean into this space, to sit and share like their gifts and their experiences, and to start to learn how to sit in that discomfort, which is really interesting because we're talking about a group of like therapists, people in the helping profession. So it was really surprising to me to see how much decision making, and just how much the whole agency was like fear driven.
Yeah, no, white fragility is the worst. It just
Mhm.
ruins everything.
Mhm.
And the thing is that there's always so much potential.
Mhm.
And you were talking about feeling like you're an introvert, and then but having that strength. And I
Mhm.
think we talked earlier about the strength of your family on this territory that's yours. Of course, that's where that strength came from. And now here in the Black Lives Matter movement that's happening, really and truly, people are starting to get aware. And because some people are still fighting that, they're fighting and unfortunately in positions of power, that's where
Yeah.
the organizations go. And so AROC, the nonprofit here out of Community Wise, it's done that, policy work so that literally you're just handing it to nonprofits and being like, here you go. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. They do have accountability processes. That's the irony, is that, we know that there's not very many organizations that are being accountable, that take the training and then actually institute the changes that are needed. We know that the stats are there. So it's really, I know when people are lying.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Because
Yeah.
the accountability process is there, and most of the nonprofits still won't do it.
Exactly. And that's, I think, what really came to the surface was AROC has this diagram where they talk about, assessing where your agency is at, and based on, whether you're active or inactive, and then fear motivated or values motivated. And so I could really see the agency kind of trying to move, but, going from a place of perpetuating harm to performative. And that was, that's equally harmful. And especially for, a staff member and for clients. And that's what I really tried to bring it back to, and that's what really informed the approach that we took was, I had multiple conversations with the CEO, with my supervisors, who at that time were, supportive and really said, when I came into this role, I talked about how I wanted to have partnerships with my community, how I wanted to be able to have a satellite office in my community or to bridge services somehow. But basically, in the time that I had been there, it became so apparent how harmful that would be, because you're not talking about sexual violence from anything other than how it, affects a very privileged white community. You're not talking about how sexual violence looks in Indigenous communities or any other, minorities or marginalized groups. You're really not, and that's harmful. That's super harmful, and that's why you're not seeing as many clients, coming through the doors and sticking around.
Yeah.
And so, I started to triage, clients who were identifying as Indigenous and wanted an Indigenous therapist. And, the feedback that I got from clients was huge in informing my, approach and moving forward. And I really think that that's the way that it needs to be done, is like, if you're there to serve the community and, especially in this role where you hold a lot of power, it is your job to redistribute that power, to, use that in a good way, and to make sure that your services are all client centered. What, or else what are you doing?
You're getting funding. You're getting funding.
Yes.
There was this elder, he's since passed away. He used to be the executive director of the Friendship Center. He once told me that white nonprofits are for the white wives that were sitting at home twiddling their thumbs while their husbands did oil and gas downtown, and it gave them something to do. And I've been unable to disprove him since he said it to me. And the intimate partner violence, model that's kind of out there is kind of the white model, right? And as opposed to more of a Indigenous lens, multicultural lens, there's that picture of family violence, right? So and willing to, talk about a completely different dynamic. And that's what we found, like when we talk about family violence in general, people are still really using the intimate model, intimate partner model. And that's the problem when it comes to not just the Indigenous community. I mean, there's honor-based violence as well here in the Northeast. And, there's many different dynamics to it. And that's always been my problem with this. Like, obviously in this co-chair position of the city, this is the type of thing that we're hearing. And then, yeah, we have lateral violence in our
Mm-hmm.
community. And that's again, that family violence that we
Mm-hmm.
don't, that the white nonprofits don't want to really go down that road.
Yeah.
Like you said, they're uncomfortable doing land acknowledgements,
Mm-hmm.
meaningful ones, let
Yeah.
alone actually being truthful, right? Um, so yeah, you're really stuck in a rock and a hard place to
Yeah.
infiltrate some of these companies and then try to bring systemic changes, but there's not
Mm-hmm.
the support there. So
Mm-hmm.
most recently, I heard of a group. They had me come to their policy development, and they were talking about partnerships where
Mm-hmm.
we bring in Indigenous person, then we have to bring in more so that way
Mm-hmm.
they're supported.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that people are always trying to do an environmental scan of where are we on truth and reconciliation. And it's like, well, we're not even in a space where Indigenous
Mm-hmm.
liaisons are safe in these
Exactly.
nonprofits yet.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. And that's, the conversations that we had really early on were like, you're wanting to build these partnerships. And I agree that that is the most responsible way to do work, is to build the partnerships and bridges, um, and like in healthy relationship. But, we were so far from that. And so that's where, the idea of starting internally was, the most ethical. And that means let's just start even having conversations. Let's just start doing that work within the agency, and knowing what that was going to bring up. I myself, of course, trusted the process, because I know what that's going to look like, and I know what's going to come to the surface, and I was prepared for all of that, and able to have my supports outside of the agency, externally, with community, consulting with elders, doing my work. But not having that recognized, that's double the work. And that, it comes back to this walking in two worlds, and often that's not recognized, like the I guess the responsibility of all of that, and that I don't leave that in the workplace. When I walk out into the world, these are my lived experiences. I have family members who are impacted by sexual violence. I know, that I know what that looks like in my community. And I also deserve that space to be able to integrate that into my work in a responsible way. And yeah, like, nonprofits are inherently, harmful in a different way, and, very virtuous. And I think that's what, really came out, is that, we as an agency were built and really upholding white supremacy. Um,
With that Christian white saviorism,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that's the problem, is that it's still
Hmm.
coming from that place of we'll save you. And I mean, I've seen
Yep.
it with teachers, right? Thinking
Yeah.
that they're saving all these Indigenous kids from gang violence. And I just thought,
Hmm.
you white
Yeah.
savior, shove that.
Yes. Yes.
And it's so problematic because like I hear what you're saying, your skill set, your knowledge, and
Hmm.
we need you exactly doing what you should be doing because
Hmm.
I know just some background. I have sexual violence, family violence in my background.
Hmm.
I had a grandfather actually go to jail for that. And,
Yeah.
that really affected a lot of people in my
Of
family as a
course.
result. And we have problematic elders that are prominent elders
Hmm.
that are hurting
Yeah.
Indigenous girls and Indigenous boys. And when they confide, and if you're a registered social worker, you have to tell. I am not. But that bigger
Hmm.
picture of, okay, well, how do we get support networks for
Yeah.
this child? And the truth is, because we have the Sheldon Kennedy
Hmm.
groups and some of these wounded warriors. There's some other groups, but they still don't have Indigenous knowledge. They're still
Hmm.
coming from that, Christian based white
Hmm.
savior, intimate partner violence concept, as opposed to, understanding our issues. And you are that person They can absolutely change the system. There's some other
Mhm.
amazing people trying to do that
Mhm.
same work, but um, again, it's that barriers they come up against where the people in
Yeah.
power are so, you know, stuck in their white fragility. They can't see outside and allow you the space to do the
Mhm.
work that we need you to do, and we
Yeah.
need it everywhere, right? We
Yeah.
need you to like develop an army, and that army goes out and
Mhm.
fixes this because
Yeah.
it needs fixed.
Yeah, for
So that's
sure.
what we need. So I just hope I hear you, and I see this
Mhm.
all too bad, too much, too often, and we need more understanding from Canadians that their role is to step back and to
Yeah.
give that space. And the worst part is if they lifted you and gave you that, room to work. But what I'm finding, and I think I'm coming to more peace with actually, is
Mhm.
that this is an Indigenous centered conversation.
Yeah.
They're used to settler centered in conversations, and we just have to start building our own network because
Yeah.
we cannot rely on them in any capacity, because they're just too stuck in their white fragility and their saviorism to actually
Mhm.
do the work to allow us the space.
Yeah.
So I'm wishing you all the luck in the world as you're going through this journey, because I know we need you, and we
Mhm.
need lots of you.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, recognizing that like saviorism is on that spectrum of racism,
Yeah.
is really difficult for many people to acknowledge. And um that, yeah, somehow that kind of became convoluted in my work, that those were the parts that I was really pushing away, is that if you're in that space, you're not willing to accept feedback, in that space along that spectrum, you don't have the intentions of really helping or creating change. It's to be seen as helping, or to be seen as creating change, that performative nature.
Yeah.
And that's where I had to set really hard boundaries of like, that's not my work, that's your work. I'm here for my clients, I'm here for my community. These are the things that are coming up, and really passing that along. Identifying that was really hard. Well, not not difficult for me, but to um, I guess highlight that for the agency became me against them, and that's where I started to really experience a lot of harm. Um, tons and tons of gaslighting that, like I said, was being witnessed this time, because a lot of staff were further along in their work, and they were actually really, integrating, the shared knowledge. And what we were doing was centering Indigenous voices, bringing in Indigenous facilitators to do training, you know, getting together in circle and, consulting about clients in a different way, where we could do that from a human place.
Mm.
When we sit in circle, part of the teachings was to come to that circle as whole, and to learn how to make decisions from that place of being whole, in terms of sinking into your spirit and allowing that mental, emotional, physical part to be aligned. And for so much of the work that we were doing, it was really disconnected. So that was huge for people to come together and to do that. It was powerful, and it was rewarding. And I love that work. I love my job. I love counseling. I love all of it. That's what I'm there for. I'm not there to console you, when you get upset, when that white fragility comes out,
Yeah.
or to, you know, console egos. And I think that's really what it came down to was, throughout the process, it really they doubled down, and all of a sudden there was performance concerns, associated with my work. And um, I was assigned a new, manager because my supervisor left. And there was a lot of like toxic micromanagement where, it really is very fear-based, very ego-driven, um, built upon supremacy and keeping people in line. So this is what, staff started to notice is, you know, this agency claims to be, really client centered and, meet the needs of their staff. And they do that as long as you don't speak up or speak against them.
Mm.
As long as you're quiet and follow the rules, you'll get through. And it kind of started this collective movement. And I do have to say that I had a lot of support from staff and a lot of people willing to, step up and use their voice, use their power and privilege in responsible ways. But unfortunately, it did come to a head, and I really tried to move up through the ladder and have, these concerns addressed. And in the end, I had to leave the agency because it was so harmful, to the point where they were, harassing me with HR and harassing me with, meetings being recorded and, threatening to put me on a performance plan and, all of these things to just quiet and silence me. And, that was not something that I was willing to do. I wasn't willing to compromise my values, or be a part of this system. So I did leave the agency. And since then I have, filed a human rights complaint against the agency. And I'm really, grateful that that's moving along and that that was picked up and that there seems to be a lot of support there. I'm hopeful in that process, but, I can't really speak to where that's going to go or, if justice will ever come.
Hmm. Yeah, I know
Mhm,
it's really hard putting those human rights complaints through and seeing if they'll take them even.
mhm,
That becomes a regular problem as well. And I find that, the human rights are still coming from that Western point of view.
mhm,
So they don't necessarily understand racism. I've seen them really come down on discrimination for accessibility and come down for LGBTQ2 plus issues. But I
mhm.
really don't see the racism being addressed in that organization yet. Or, well, not just that one, I just mean like all of the human rights
Yeah,
organizations that I have seen, I haven't really seen the racism properly addressed, mainly because they're not filled with people of color.
yeah,
you know, so
yeah,
it's so interesting how the very powers of structure or structures of power infiltrate everything that is supposed to actually uplift those who are oppressed by
yeah.
it. But so I'm gonna, definitely encourage you to come back on and talk about that process when
Mhm,
you're ready, and
yeah,
and continue that conversation. And if you feel like you would like to tell others, because I think for a lot of natives, um, they don't file human rights complaints because of the time, the effort, the
yeah.
work, but it's hearing another native go through the process,
Mhm,
I think is important for other natives to be like, okay, well, maybe this is something that I can be thinking about. Or maybe if I'm in a really crappy workplace, these are the things I should be thinking about in order to file that human rights complaint. So,
yeah,
I think I applaud you for doing that because it's a very difficult road to do. Just like filing complaints for police. A lot of people
mhm,
are afraid to do that. And
yeah,
I encourage people to do it anyway. You can, they are supposed to be separate points of view. I've gone to the Calgary Police Office, for example, and they have very clearly a different division from the rest
mhm,
on
yeah,
issues when it comes to complaints. That said, are they capable of doing it yet? Well, it's not like they've apologized for their role in, like, I don't know, clearing the plains or something. So I don't know if they're really ready for that. But that bigger
yeah,
picture that, I want to see Indigenous people standing up for their rights,
yeah,
and reporting. There's stophate.ab.ca for hate
mhm,
crime instances. And sometimes we have hard evidence and we're just like, whatever, I don't have time. And I just want to
yeah,
encourage Indigenous people to just take that extra step so that there are statistics to prove it, and that
yes,
there are, you might be the person on the podcast next talking about a successful human
mhm,
rights complaint and what that entailed. So, and
yeah.
I want that for our people.
Yeah, for sure. I hope that, what I was told, in comparing cases so far was that there wasn't any that really, reflected back, my situation and the different layers. And that's so unfortunate because we know that it happens so much. I have so many friends working in the community who have the exact same stories, like the exact same stories, and it's not okay. And that's part of the reason why I went this route, was because, I'm not just doing it for myself. I hope that it does set a new precedence, and I hope that there are eyes on that case, and that, there is some level of accountability because it's happening everywhere. And people always ask, like how they can help, or, how they support, how to be a good ally, And then when it comes down to it, like, taking a stand in a space like this, I'm not sure who stands next to me, and I know for sure that my community does. And that's the only reason why I was able to take it this far and to stay so long within an agency where I was experiencing harm, was
Mhm.
because, like I said, I love my job, and I love, the work that I do. And I know that that's where I'm supposed to be. Um, and so I do think that I can, credit the community for that support, and for my ancestors for literally paving the way for me. So I would love to, yeah, follow up and have conversations about where that goes. And, I am the type of person that I want to, be there and support in community. That's one of the things that is really big for me, especially as a psychologist, because there are so few Indigenous psychologists, is that I want to, create a community. The work that I'm doing now is through a collective, to be able to offer alternate, spaces for counseling and healing services that are, rooted in to be approaches to wellness, and to acknowledging that there are diverse ways of healing, and that, spirituality plays a huge role in that for me. So I appreciate it so much.
Oh, that's great. I'm so glad that you came on to talk about this because that's the other component of it, of healing. If we're not including spirituality,
Mm,
we're not going to get there. We need to
yeah.
be including that. And I think honoring your ancestors, honoring the spirits that are around you that are guiding you in a good way, like that's the way that our bodies heal too. And we
Hmm.
don't even recognize it sometimes.
Yeah.
But we've been told not to. It's back to the imposed
Hmm.
Western belief systems.
Yeah.
And worse, we have to heal from the idea that some people have told us what we do spiritually is like
Hmm.
devil worshiping and negative, when it's
Hmm.
actually the opposite. That's what helps heal us and
Hmm.
helps us
Yeah.
move forward. In the Wellbriety, they always say that culture is prevention.
Yeah.
And I believe that wholeheartedly. So not just support, I applaud what you're doing.
Hmm.
In the QT BIMPOC area, like we talk about, where are the racially diverse, where are
Hmm.
those that are not homophobic, transphobic?
Yeah.
How are we supposed to have counseling if racial battle fatigue and homophobia are constantly draining a person of their
Hmm.
spirit, right? That straight
Yeah.
cis agenda being imposed on people,
Yeah.
very difficult for our people to heal in that atmosphere.
Hmm.
So that's why what you're doing is so needed for folks to move forward and to heal, seeing their culture as the strength.
Yeah.
The Western world likes to kind of focus on it as a negative.
Yeah.
And when it's the opposite, it's empowering. And that's why they say it's negative, because
Yeah.
if people understood their full potential and their full strength, and had their spirits helping them through this, like
Hmm.
even for me, I was
Hmm.
taught that way. But
Yeah.
when I understood what our people had lived through, the resiliency, for me to be here now, I'm like, I'm a winning lotto ticket, and look at me and all of my ancestors following me around. Look at
Yes.
me. I'm just so cocky about it.
Yeah. Good. Yes.
So, and that's the whole point, right? Like
Yeah.
that's what saved me. Your community, the Blackfoot people, they saved me, because I just was such a lost little Dene in
Hmm.
an urban
Mm.
environment. And it was the Blackfoot elders that were like, whoa, 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 girl, get over here.
Yeah.
And now I'm here talking to you, hoping that we can change the structure, dismantle the
Hmm.
saviorism, and start actually giving people legitimate help. Because I think that's the power dynamic. It's not just colonialism, it's not just white supremacy, but it's that, oh, I'm in charge of your healing.
Yeah.
And that's the most destructive way to look at healing, I think, possible. If people aren't empowered, they're
Hmm.
not healing, right? So
Yeah.
then that's what we want to
100%.
see. So anyway, thank you for being on my show again. And
Of
I
course.
hope that you'll consider coming on a third time to talk about the end journey when you get there. I mean, that could be years, I don't know, but you're
Mhm.
welcome when you're ready, anytime, even if it was tomorrow. And
Yeah,
we can do that. So yeah,
of
and
course.
I'm going to go with my ridiculous exit, and you're more than welcome to join in, because I think you, of course, have an even better lens of everything, all these resources that I give people,
Mhm.
even though people may not see them as that right now. I'm proud of this podcast, giving solutions, cultural safety training, cultural first aid, and trying to create that safer space for Indigenous, people of color, those with disabilities, LGBTQ2 plus to speak. Here to help .bc.ca has a whole section on what is Indigenous cultural safety and why I should care about it, by authors Cheryl Ward, Chelsea Branch, Alicia Fritkin. And those are cultural action tools. And I've said hundreds of times in my podcast, so I hope people support Indigenous work as part of their, reconciliation work and settler understandings. I'm just lucky enough to highlight and repeat it here. Internalized racism, lateral violence is another form of violence Indigenous and marginalized folks experience by the structure of racism, homophobia, sexism. And this was all imposed on these lands. This straight cis concept and
Mhm.
the Indian Act, Indian residential schools, land clearing policies. RacialEquityTools.org has a whole section on internalized racism for folks who are struggling with that, by Donna Bevins. And I bring it up because I have another friend in my life who is QT Bimpak. He's Dene from where I'm from, actually, and he wants to focus on sobriety with that lens of like, okay, let's unpack homophobia, let's unpack that racism, so that we can, thrive in who we are. That's why these RacialEquityTools.org is such an important resource.
Mhm.
Do's and don'ts for bystander intervention by American Friends Service Commission or Committee. So they help people. If you see a Muslim woman with a hijab getting, mistreated, this is things that you can and cannot do. But here's the thing, like, it wasn't yesterday, it was the day before. My Muslim friend she had 3 attacks that she knew about in one day happening against Muslim women here in Calgary. That's not even the rest of the country, just here.
Mhm.
So, we need people to understand that there are things that you can do. And if you don't know your first aid for cultural intervention, then go to this resource. It's afsc.org,
Mhm.
American Friends Service Committee. And if you're in Alberta and you see or experience racism, you can report it to Act to End Racism or text at 587-506-3838. Indigenous have been talking about our issues, sharing our traumas and reports, commissions, and public hearings, just so it can be regularly disregarded. No more. Honor our words, honor the treaties. Listen to politicians and their policies and platforms. If they don't recognize Indian residential schools, just bringing that up, they don't
Mhm.
recognize marginalized people in their budget with Gender Equity Plus. They're cutting violence prevention programs, services, Indigenous
Mhm.
education, uterus health choices, gay straight alliances, lack of human rights for migrants, immigrants, folks with disabilities. Know that your vote to that party directly negatively impacts marginalized people. The demand that they implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission reports, calls to action, and the recommendations of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples report. The multiple reports about child welfare reform, and just going to throw it out there, I had another one that came out from the Office of the Child Advocate here in Alberta. We have violence prevention programs, and now 231 calls to justice from the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit. And our guest talking about violence against women and gendered violence in general. We don't have the lenses, and we need
Mhm.
that. And we need politicians to be implementing this type of lens and talking about it. And I'm just not even hearing it. Denying
Mhm.
these reports is a form of abuse called gaslighting. Our people are experiencing extreme racism in the educational, justice, and health institutions, with multiple reports that say the same thing. Demand change from election platforms, politicians, nonprofits. They don't
Mhm.
understand
Yeah.
colonialism, racism, privilege, sexism. They literally have zero business running or being in positions of power. It should be
Mhm.
understood by everybody: parties, politicians, community organizations, nonprofits, sports clubs. A really great article I said in episode 62 is Truth Before Truth, How Non-Indigenous Canadians Become Allies. And holy, I should update that because right now with the 215 graves that were found, and then they've have since found way more, everyone's like, how do I be an ally to non-indigenous or to indigenous people? And I literally, you can Google it and there will be so many articles about it. I recently had a 4-minute video that kind of got retweeted a lot because of it. And it's just shocking to me that people still don't know how to engage indigenous people. If you're experiencing emotional distress after hearing anything we talk about today and want to talk, call the First Nation and Inuit Hope for Wellness helpline at 1-855-242-3310. It's toll free, open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I like it because it has a text option at hopeforwellness.ca and, of course, a lot of Indigenous languages. If more related to missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit, there is a toll-free national crisis line at 844-413-6649. And if you're non-Indigenous, you can always call 211 or 833-456-4566 for more supports if you need that. I just am going to add for the first time today the 60 Scoop Indigenous Society of Alberta website, ssisa.ca. And that's really specific to Alberta, but I think it's a really important resource. And if you go onto Twitter and go #survivor-driven, that might bring you some more resources for 60 Scoop kids. And 60 Scoop is a policy that continues today. So just because it says 60 Scoop doesn't mean it's not stopping today. If it wasn't for this stupid policy, I may not even be political. If you see or experience racism, report it to Act to End Racism or text at 587-506-3838. I also want to give a shout out. It is Pride, number one, but number two, the Trevor Project has lots of different supports for LGBTQ, their youth, and peer support. So go to their number here at 866-844-7386. And then of course, even I'm old, but even I access the Kids Help Phone at 1-800-668-6868 and lifevoice.ca crisis supports, LGBTQ2+ crisis supports if you so need them. Violence is my everyday reality. Every Indigenous generation has faced it. That's why I started this podcast, to speak freely without interruption, tone policing, leadership shaming, without gaslighting questions, as many people don't want to hear Indigenous opinion, sure want to tell us theirs, usually by people who've never experienced racism, who know nothing about colonialism, the constant surveillance of Indigenous people, our protests, our vigil, and our rights, microaggressions. Then there's people dealing with internalized racism who become gatekeepers and survive off the status quo, others who are in their trauma. Internal, external racism is a everyday reality for Indigenous people. That's why I started this podcast, as a boundary to be heard. I want to say thank you to my ancestors, my granny and my mom, of what strength looks like through your example. I want to thank my dad for teaching me to be strong and blunt, my stepmom for showing me what a proud culture is through her Austrian family and roots, and teaching me to be a proud Calgarian. It is through her I'm a second-generation proud Calgarian. Thank you to my husband, Darcy, for producing and editing this show. He's been my childhood friend, my husband, the father of our child, and my support down my journey of the Red Road. He's witnessed decades of racism and sexism. And to our child, who we are blessed to learn from daily, I am honored you chose us. You give me daily accountability to be a better and stronger person. I hope my daughter and my family will be proud in the future of us trying to discuss these present day issues in a way they can understand. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you to my previous donors for showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you from the bottom of my heart. To those who cannot afford to give, we'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments and questions. And I also have a YouTube channel where you can go and subscribe. Go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. And I want to end by giving side eye to those Calgary rabbits. You're lucky I'm not Tradish. And my beautiful cousin would respond, or you'd be in my dish. Thank you for listening to the show, and thank you for being on it.